You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Thanks for joining us for today's episode. We are in the thick of summer, the hot, the hazy, a little bit crazy. I'm going to stop there because we'll keep rhyming and it'll go down a bad place, and Matt will yell.
I was enjoying it. I mean, I like rhymes, and you're always good at it, so let's just ride that wave.
Summertime. Make me sit back in the
Little DJ Jazzy Jeff Fresh Prince.
That's right. So, during the summer leading up to it, towards the end after Labor Day in Portland, Oregon, we hold a sustainability summit. And over the past several years, it's been our biggest event by far. It remains the hottest topic. I think this year it's a little bit harder because it's a tougher business environment, tougher economic environment, tougher cost environment. But you contrast that, Matt, with the regulations that are coming in, where it leaves no space where you cannot drop sustainability henceforth.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. And I think, in fact, you just hosted a roundtable in Boston, and I wasn't there, but the takeaways, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the takeaways were like, we cannot take our foot off the accelerator right now just because, things are tighter financially because of the regulatory environment. It's going to come whether we want it to or not, and we need to be positioned and on the offense and not on the defense.
Yeah, you have to have a strategy. You have to have an on-ramp. You have to keep going down the road. There's no chance you pull off the road and then all of a sudden catch up. And if you do, it's going to cost you more later than it is figuring out your strategy of ramping up. So I think this is a really important inflection point in our industry where we have these conversations, especially on our podcast here, where we have experts come on and kind of share their perspective on different industry aspects. And today, especially on sustainable materials, which are the kind of the cornerstone of many of our company's strategies. So Matt, who is our guest today?
Yeah, we have Katie O'Hara, who's the Director of Account Management at Dynamic Foam. Katie, welcome to the Shoe In Show. We're very excited that you're here. Dynamic Foam's a partner of FDRA's and doing some really great work in the sustainability space and the material space. So welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, so I'm like the layman, and Andy's the wise professor here on our podcast, and you're the technical expert. So the three of us are going to do some damage. I will do the least amount of damage, I think. But why don't we just kind of start off with what's kind of top of mind right now at Dynamic as you think about what Andy and I just talked about companies starting to kind of reevaluate the spend and the investment. Where do you all come in to say, you know what? Now's the time to actually put more money where your mouth is, per se.
Yeah. Oh, you guys hit the nail on the head on all of those points, to be honest. It's like we're seeing companies just only look at cost. We're seeing companies have layoffs so that, the sustainability person is now spread way too thin. They can't make any changes. They don't have the bandwidth. So it's too bad because I did see a lot of momentum. Let's say even a year and a half ago, like I felt like some of these materials were really gaining traction with brands, and we were excited about that. And we're not selling a high cost product either. We're recycled EVA. We're kind of like, the lowest cost recycled material you could probably change to on the market. So we might have it easier than other sustainable materials have it right now, but we're still running into those same issues where it's just not a priority. It's like we get requests for PFAS testing. PFAS has really climbed up this scale here because of the regulations, like you guys said. And of course that's super important. But again, I think it's, just having a sustainable or recycled material, just other things just keep coming up that are sort of just trumping that whole movement. Which is, it's just more challenging than it has been in the past.
I'll add a point to this too, because Katie and I talk a lot But for me, it's, does a company have a strategy? And if they do, you build in the agility to deal with those things as they come up and make sure that you're still heading in the right path. The companies who don't have a strategy are the ones who, something pops up and they're completely unprepared and they freak out and they start making calls and they don't know what to do. And to me, I can't live that way. To me, that's very stressful. And you ultimately make less wise decisions if you're just bouncing around without a principle or a guide or a foundation to how you're choosing materials and moving forward. And I think the regulatory environment, we, at FRA we go back and forth because it's like we don't want to be over regulated. We want to be right size regulated, right? We're not afraid of regulation if it's the right regulation. And I think in some ways the regulations can help people with the strategy moving forward. I think some people are just a little paralyzed, but that's what I think is I see uh, the companies who are doing the best in the space have a culture where everybody's bought into it, right? And then they have the strategy and
Yes.
then they make the decisions. The people who are having the real
Yes.
problems don't have a culture around sustainability, or they don't have the strategy where they can make intelligent decisions on the fly really quickly and build that in, and they're just kind of going around. And so that's kind of how I see the industry right now, and I think that's why we're constantly beating a drum around. And let's talk about this, Katie. Let's talk about like the environmentally preferred material guide, because I know you guys have particularly like aligned to that to help companies say, here's a very simple way of looking at choosing better materials. Um, how has that helped? And I guess I should point out the material guide is on shoesustainability.com, and it basically looks at what is commercially available materials that are better than fossil fuel based materials, traditional materials that won't cost you an arm and a leg higher, right? You can just ramp it up. So I know you guys talk a lot about kind of mixing materials as well. So I'll let you kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny when you were talking before, I went right back to the EPM
Yeah.
guide that we put together. That was like such an awesome collaboration, and I just wish everybody would at least start there. It's like if you don't have a strategy, you just start there and see what you can do, And I use that link in any sort of material information decks that I send out. It's in my email signature. I love to just promote that because I think it's it kind of we did a lot of the work for them. So like, thank you guys for putting that together because I think it's huge and all the resources that you pulled through the industry. It's such a good starting point if you have no strategy because that's exactly it. We work with both types of companies. Some have an amazing strategy and it's super robust. And at times it can be difficult to sort of keep up with that. But I honestly feel that that's better than having no strategy at all, of course. So yeah, I think, like we've talked about in the sustainability summits, it's like, what can people do now? What can people do that's better? You have certain brands that are really chasing the pie in the sky, which I think is awesome because they're pushing everyone else to do so. But I think for smaller brands, for startups, for brands without a strategy, there's so many things that they can do right now. That's a relatively easy switch, even within a season or two, you could probably improve a whole shoe by 20% easy, like make it 20% more sustainable, 20% better. And whether that's recycled or bio. And to your point, Andy, we have tried to come up with a variety of materials so that people aren't stuck with just one option. It's like, is part of your strategy bio? We can help you there. Is part of your strategy post-consumer recycled? We can help you there. So, we are trying to make it easier for people, but it's still, we still face those same challenges as I'm sure all brands are feeling it right now.
Yeah.
So we understand, but yeah, if we can, if we as a supplier can make it easier, and I feel like the FDRA is doing everything they can to make it easier, then let's keep.
Katie, one of the things I want to ask you about is this: we're in this trend for performance where like foam is like king, right? It's, if you think about the Hokas of the world and those who are just adding more and more material for comfort and performance, and that doesn't seem to be going away. So I have to think we're using a lot of foam just as traditional foam, I would think, and like we're using a lot of material right now, which means there's going to be some waste, which means that the brand should be incentivized to actually look for alternative materials because we're using more materials to drive performance. Am I reading that correctly just based on the trends that you're seeing?
I agree. I think about that all the time when I am at a store looking at shoes. They just keep getting thicker and thicker. And that's
Yep.
not only performance running shoes, but just the platform sneakers, I guess, that have come back from my high school days.
Yep.
Terrible. But anyway, that's what the kids are wearing. So they're going to buy it. But I think about the amount of material and I'm like, we're sort of going backwards. So these companies, I feel like, really need to either make it up somewhere else or start using, I'll use the 20% example again. It's like if Hoka can put 20% recycled and still maintain the performance that they have, their shoe just got 15% better as a whole because most of their shoe is that midsole. So, I mean, you're totally right with those trends. And that's kind of why we're working on the performance so heavily. We started with 100% recycled and that works great for a lot of applications. But when we're sampling for running shoe companies, we give them 50% and the other part is a high performance EVA, try to give them the best of both worlds. So, but Matt, that's an interesting observation because I have definitely had the same thing.
Basically, we were at just the Whopper, and then someone decided to go that they wanted a double Whopper. And then somebody was like, it's better than a double Whopper, a triple Whopper. And then all of a sudden, you know what happens, Matt? We're all on the Ozempic.
We're all on Ozempic, and
that's what happens.
Your grandma's now into the triple Whopper, and I think the triple Whopper is a Hoka at this point. I've lost where like the connection is on the analogy.
No.
But when I go to Costco and the grandmother and the mom and the hip kid are all wearing Hokas with the added foam, and Hoka is now the third largest athletic brand in the world. All of that is quite interesting to me.
I would say, Hoka is the one that is kind of the lead of the movement, and they did it in particular. If you go back to a previous podcast I did with Chris Hillier, he actually unlocks like why they created it, and it was downhill running. Like it hurt to run downhill, and so they were stacking it in order to solve that kind of problem, right? And I will say Deckers works really hard on sustainability to solve those problems. But it's not like I have seen where the Samba Classic now has 2 extra layers around the bottom of it. Like my sister-in-law was wearing that, and I had to take a picture. I was like, this is crazy. So it's definitely a trend that's happening with that, and it's okay as long as we're figuring out how to displace the impact somewhere else. And I think obviously we talk about this a lot, and there's a lot people can do, but what's the strategy then, right? We don't want to inhibit the design of a shoe if that's what the trend is, but there's other things that we can balance against it. I would say on the performance, Katie, it's always interesting because, as you point out, like there are some shoes that we can do a lot of bio or a lot of recycled, right? And those are like low impact, kind of, go into the mall type thing or something like that, versus the running shoe where you can't give a lot of performance up to get in. But I would say from what I've seen and some of the work you guys have been doing too, the really good work is the recycled and bio performance is better now than it has been in years. Like it's to me, to see, to talk to different labs that are looking at this stuff, it was shocking to see how good the performance is now versus traditional, more plastic foam EVAs.
We've made huge strides, honestly, just since I've been with the company 9 years and I've seen it just exponentially get better. And that's what we're focusing on. So we kind of jumped on the Hoka trend, the recovery shoe, the recovery sandals
Oh,
that are just
yeah.
literally
Yeah.
one piece of injection molded EVA, but there's a ton of material in there. It's efficient from a, so there's a sustainability piece there, right? There's not a lot of waste. It's one piece. You're not
Right.
gluing. There's no textile, all of that. So we're like, well, let's jump on this trend. And so we developed the injection molded 50% recycled EVA that will still, and it feels so good. We just got samples and I was actually blown away. So I kind of wish some brands would sort of throw away what they got 5 years ago, not throw away, sorry, recycle what they got 5 years ago and, try it again, because we've made so many huge improvements just to the performance of the material. So
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're also meeting the trend thing is important because trend is always going to lead, right? What does the consumer want, and that's what's going to drive what the brands do and what they innovate in and what money they put R&D into. But you're meeting them there, right? You're keeping up with the pace, as you run alongside them with these alternatives that you can pump back in. Andy's exactly right. Like, the Hoka trend is here, and they're doing a lot of great work on sustainability, and it's been replicated and copied throughout the industry. So it's not going away. And so we got to come up with solutions that support the brands whose end goal is to meet consumer demand and need. I mean, it boils down to that.
Yep.
It's as simple as that.
Absolutely.
I think the other part too is we have a marketing problem around sustainability. Like we go way too far out of bounds sometimes. Different brands do, making claims. We have some companies doing amazing work that are very shy about talking about it because of legal issues. And there's somewhere in there a sweet spot where we can look at collections and no one thinks that this can happen, but you can definitely add in more money to a shoe and price it up if the value is there for the consumer, right? If it's more comfortable, if it's more durable, if it is more sustainable, those are things that you can do. It's just that it's harder to do, it's harder to merchandise, and so some companies just don't try to do that. Whereas I do see a few companies trying to segment some of their product and say, okay, this is like actually a more high value, high performance, and these are going to be a little bit more expensive. And some people, what they do is they fold in the collaborations in that space to make it a little bit more attractive if they're doing it with, I don't know who, Post Malone
Yeah.
or something. You know what I'm saying? So like people like that, where you can like fold things in and do it. But at the summit this year in particular, like that seems to be a real rubbing point that we heard from people in Boston, was the fact that marketing was not, I don't know how to put it, but like marketing wasn't really being helpful, or marketing was like trying to use other kind of, language and copy and visuals other than sustainability, even though the shoe was very sustainable that they were trying to push. So there seems to be this like notion that the consumer wants sustainability, but they're not buying it, right? And so they're like, well, we can't really market it but here's the problem with that, with our industry. That means the consumer wants it and we're not delivering it. Like that's latent demand. That's classic latent demand in economics. So this idea that they want it, but they don't want it. No, they want it. They're not buying it because you're not providing them what they really
Right.
want. So that's the problem. And to allow a marketer in our industry to sit there and say, well, there's a problem because there's a disconnect. The disconnect's in our product. It's not the consumer. The consumer's king, right? So we got to figure that out as an industry. And hopefully, at the summit, we can have some of those conversations. But it is like this idea that we live in a price restricted environment. Like the consumer has plenty of capital, especially on their credit cards. Maybe not so much anymore, but if you give them a product that's like crazy, I mean, I think they'll spend the money for it.
That is pretty interesting because I've noticed people are willing to pay a lot of money for Ons and Hokas, but those are, I feel like they're paying for the trend piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's just take those two as an example. If the consumer is willing to pay for the trend and the comfort, what's to keep you from adding 20% more sustainable material into your shoe? I don't actually think it would change your cost that dramatically. And if the customer is still willing to pay $150 plus for that because it's either trendy or comfortable or, everyone else has it. I think they could almost use that as an opportunity to sneak in some recycled or bio content or
not even talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Why not even say anything? It still performs well. Why lower the expectations of your buyer and still do what's right and just put it in your public reporting with Wall Street and like this is how we're tackling it.
Or it could be on the hang tag or on the box. It's not to say you can't tell people about it, but right. I have seen some shoes where they're, speckling the midsole, for example, where it's like they are trying to show that it's sustainable. Salomon did a really cool shoe actually, where their whole goal was to make it 100% recycled content. And I don't know if they quite got there, but I think it was $150. I bought a pair because our material was in it. And they perform great. I mean, honestly, if you didn't look at it, you wouldn't know it's any different than another Salomon shoe. Oh. So that's a great example for some of these companies.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But even if it's price conscious, even if you're selling in Walmart, right? There's things that you can do for a shoe with backing and other things that you don't ever see that you could choose a better recycled material or even a little bit of bio, and it actually is not going to price it up too high. And we were like actually at Boston, what was really interesting, Matt, Kevin Brunning from Clark's was there. And we were talking about pricing and cost issues. And he was like, you should really tie more of your sustainability to your tariffs, because if you go over a certain amount of FOB, your tariffs could reduce in cost. So actually adding more sustainable content that costs a little bit more can be offset because your tariff may be lower.
Yeah.
And Kevin's smart. It's like Kevin Brunning the Kraken showed up and just cracked it out. It was crazy. I was like, yeah, we haven't even thought about that. But that's where, clever, creative people can get into it and say, actually, if we do put more bio into it, it does cost more. We could save more money on the tariff, but no one's really done the calculations on that yet. So that'll be an interesting thing too to start to look at to see if we could provide a guide or some samples of what that might look like. I don't know what that. I don't know what the tariff is for that, Matt. I don't know if it's is it rubber plastic for that?
There's different price breakouts depending on what your FOB price is. So I think that's smart. We can do an analysis and publish it on shoesustainability.com just to see if there's a there. But Kevin would know. He's Captain Chapter 64. So
what a title!
What a title! I don't know if he wants that title.
Call him with questions. I think that's an amazing incentive, and it's we talk about all this regulation stuff and it's just costing everyone more money. But if the government starts thinking about it in a different way, just like you said, which, it's so easy to convince them to do things, but to incentive, not only, if they really care about sustainability, it's incentivize it and regulate it at the same time. It's sort of I don't know.
Yeah, like edibles in Colorado, right? I mean, that's
come on down.
Interesting. Interesting. They are doing that in Europe. Europe's, they're going to have a tax. They're going to have an extended producer responsibility tax, and it documents that we've seen. It's not been set by policymakers, but around 12 cents a pair. But if you have environmentally preferred materials, or there's reduced waste, or it's made in a better process, you can reduce that tax per pair. So they're trying to do that, which is interesting.
Yeah, that'd be a good case study too.
Yeah. So there's a lot happening, but I'll go back to the strategy and cultural part, because I think that's the most important thing. Is the strategy. You can face regulations cleverly by complying plus, and I mean leaning into it now and starting to develop all the different things you need to do now, and add in more value along the way and innovate along with that, right? Dual track it in that sense. And it's not easy. Obviously this is a podcast, so we can say whatever we want. It's hard to do in practice, but I will say folks like Dynamic Foam, and Kate and I have talked about this in the past, it's almost it's almost like a mixer board, right? So you go to Dynamic Foam and you say, I need this performance and I'd like to do some recycled and maybe some bio. And they start to move the dials. The bass goes up, the treble goes down, the mixer goes in, right? And you start to change your percentages to make it work where you can. But you got to start doing some of that now to figure out what your product's going to be like in the future. And you can't just jump into this stuff and like, so I think the more people who are developing a solid strategy of we want to hit this target and this is how we're going to do it. And these are, the more people who have that and enact that are going to be more successful than the people who are just kind of running around with their head cut off when PFAS passes or when, regulations start coming in line around like eco design. So it's, somebody at the Boston meeting in particular was interesting. She was like, I tell people like the rain's not going to stop. And the only question is, are we going to be dealing with the flood and we're going to be in a boat? Or are we going to be dealing with the flood and our feet are under the water? Like, which one do you want to be? Great analogy. Right? I was like, I'd like to be Noah.
We'd like a whole ark.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, I want the whole ark. I don't need an umbrella. I want the ark. Right? So, I don't know. Katie, what else before we kind of wrap up today? Is there anything else front of mind that you are thinking about or working on? I mean, I know you guys talk with brands every single day.
I don't know. I just feel like all the points made are spot on. I just, I want to figure out how we can help brands with their strategy. How do we get them to come to us? And when I say us, I mean the FDRA, their suppliers. I think that we're all a valuable resource for them if they want to implement a strategy, just because we're in it every day. It's like we have our own strategy. Mm-hmm. We've helped other customers with their strategy. I'll use an example. Superfeet is one of our large customers. It's an aftermarket insole. They have the culture. They have the strategy. They've had it for years. It's now coming to fruition, and we're actually making real changes. So once we're kind of through most of these changes to recycled materials, I'm going to do a case study and just say, what yes, it's a long process, but they started a while ago. So I think they would be a great case study too, just to see what strides that they were able to make in probably a matter of 2 years with what percentage of their products are now have recycled content, for example. So it's pretty cool. I want more brands to do that. And I know that you do too. So we'll keep working.
Yeah. Well, you have to come back with that case study. You have to come back on the next podcast and like share what you learned and
sounds good.
And drop it on the next one for sure.
But looking forward to the next sustainability summit. As always, it's on the calendar.
Yep. PDX. Awesome. Here we come.
There we go. And there's a lot of energy. There's usually close to 200 people in the room, and this year's format will change from last year's, and it'll be more discussion. We'll see where it takes us. The theme this year will be the Great Rethink. Have we been thinking about sustainability all wrong? Yeah, and it's time to get deeper into those things. And so we appreciate Dynamic Foam's continued support of our program, our sustainability program, and what we're trying to do, and the summit. And I always say, like, Katie's offering to talk to anyone who's interested in speaking with her, not just about the product they're having, but the strategy and what you can do. So when someone says, hey, why don't you give me a call and I could probably help you, give her a call. And I'm happy to make that connection. If you'd like to ping me, I'm happy to connect you with Katie so you can have that conversation, or show up in Portland and see us face to face and let's have a brewski and talk about, exactly. So Katie, thanks again. We really appreciate you coming on today and chatting with us in a fun, dynamic way about sustainability and the strategies.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Cool. Folks, Shoe and Show, every single Monday, new episode comes out. shoeandshow.com is our website where you can go back and check out all the great episodes. We appreciate you listening. If you want to learn more about the Sustainability Summit, go to fdra.org and just look up events. We've got a lot of interesting, great content and a lot of events and professional development coming up. So skill up with us. as we kind of navigate these choppy, crazy waters of the footwear industry. Until next time, be safe, have fun, put on your sunscreen. Shoeing is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.